All right, this is an article called S.E. Hinton on The Outsider Success. It gave me writer's block for 4 years. Here's a picture of S.E. Hinton and a copy of The Outsider's 50th Anniversary Edition. It's hard to believe, but The Outsiders, the teen tale of greasers and socias that Francis Ford Coppola made into a memorable 1983 movie, turns 50 this year. We caught up with author S.E. Hinton, who was just a teen herself, 16 when the book was first published, for her thoughts on the book's legacy, her struggle with writer's block, and which famous movie star still calls her mom. Entertainment Weekly says, "Happy 50th anniversary to The Outsiders. Can you believe it's been this long?" And Hinton says, "No, I can't. I can't believe I'm this old." You started writing this book when you were only 15, so you're not actually that old. Well, yeah, but I have taken to saying I wrote it when I was 6. How did this book come about? A few reasons. The first is I just like to write. I've been writing practically since I learned to read. So by the time I wrote The Outsiders, I'd been writing for about 8 years. It wasn't like, oh, all of a sudden I'm 15 years old and started writing a book. It was actually the third book I'd written. It's just the first one I ever tried to get published. Wait, what were the first 2 books? Oh, somewhere in the 6th grade, I think. I wrote one about the Civil War. I have no idea what I thought I knew about the Civil War. And when I was in 9th grade, I wrote one about some kids working on a dude ranch. And that wasn't too bad, but not anything I'd want to get published. Okay, back to The Outsiders. What sparked the idea for it? I was mad about the social situation at my high school, which was basically the socias versus the greasers, like it is in the book. I grew up in a greaser neighborhood, and I got put in what would be called today AP classes with socias, so I could see kind of both sides. Then, when a friend of mine got beaten up on his way home from school, I got mad and began a short story about a kid who got beaten up going home from the movies. That story turned out to be over 40 pages long, single-space type. And I just kept going back over it and adding more details and flashbacks and so forth. The draft the publisher saw was about the 3rd draft I've done. So, you had done a lot of self-editing. Yeah, but another reason why I wrote it is that I wanted to read it. There was nothing realistic being written for teens at the time. It was all like, Mary Jane goes to the prom. And I'd been to a few proms, and that was not what was really happening. I really wanted to read a book that dealt realistically with teenage life as I was seeing it. What was your writing process like when you were 15? Were you working on it after school? Yes, some kids like to play tennis. I liked to write. I wasn't hanging out or doing a lot of stuff teens were doing because what I liked to do was to be in my room and type. I taught myself to type when I was in 6th grade, actually, because I realized I couldn't read my own handwriting. What was your relationship with your editor like? I had a great rapport with my editor. Nobody changed a word I wrote. They asked me to cut descriptions once in a while. They corrected my spelling, thank God. And they gave me the most helpful editorial comments I'd had or have had since. At one point, the editor said, "Well, all of a sudden, Dallas has a gun. You better establish that earlier in the book." I said, "Great idea." I mean, I wasn't going in there thinking I knew it all. I was going in there glad for every kind of help they wanted to give me, but willing to stand up a little bit here and there if I thought my way was better. How do you think it affected your career to have success so young? My success was slow. My first royalty check was for $10, so I wasn't thinking, oh, I've got it made for the rest of my life. The only thing that overwhelmed me was the realization that there was an audience out there. Was that a good realization? No. It gave me writer's block for 4 years. My husband, bless his heart, he was my boyfriend at the time. He said, "You've got to get over this. I'm tired of you being dreary and gloomy and depressed. Just write 2 pages a day. Nobody ever died of 2 pages," which is spoken like a true non-writer. But he'd come over to take me out, and if I hadn't done the 2 pages, he'd just start reading the newspaper. So that was my big motive for my second book. I wanted to go out. You said your success was slow, But do you remember the moment you realized the book was sticking around? Well, I was very surprised it made it to 20 years, and after that, I wasn't surprised at all. I'm still getting the same letters, the same responses. I get so many letters from people saying, "You changed my life." That scares me. I love getting letters saying, "I never liked to read, but I read your book, and now I'm going to read other books." But the "you changed my life" stuff is scary because who am I to change anybody's life? But I've learned to deal with it by thinking The Outsiders was meant to be written, and I got chosen to write it. The rest of them I just wrote, but The Outsiders was supposed to be there. How do you feel about people crediting The Outsiders for creating the whole genre of YA? It's basically true. There'd certainly been books before that written by teenage protagonists Huckleberry Finn, The Catcher in the Rye, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Great books, but they were all published as adult books. But with The Outsiders, when it first came out, it was a drugstore paperback, the kind of thing you'd see in those spinning racks at drugstores. The publisher happened to notice it was selling real well in a certain market, and they explored it and found teachers were using it in classrooms and kids are passing it along by word of mouth. All of a sudden, I was like, oh, there's a market we can specifically tap into there. Obviously, we know how teens around the world reacted to the book, but how did the real greasers and socias react in Tulsa? Oh, well, the greasers loved it, absolutely loved it. And a lot of the socias took a second look at themselves. I remember I was doing a screening of the complete novel edition of the DVD in Tulsa, and Ralph Macchio, who played Johnny, and Tommy Howell, who played Ponyboy, were there with me. We had a question and answer thing going on afterward, and this guy gets up and he looks like he's about 65 or something, my age, and says, "This is the way it was, and this is the truth. I was there." And he'd been a greaser. How did you come up with some of the names? Did people really have names like Soda Pop and Pony? No. People ask me that all the time, and I say, I don't remember how I came up with those names, but I do know I wasn't drinking at the time. But now I love it because you can recognize the references to the book so easily. Like when on My Name is Earl, the guy goes, "Well, I had this hideout in the woods, Ponyboy style." You knew exactly what he was talking about. Or when Veronica Mars says, "Stay cool, Soda Pop." If I'd named them Jim and Bill, all of this wouldn't have happened. You spent a lot of time on the Outsiders movie set. What memories stand out the most? The best thing, besides working with Francis, whom I adored, were the boys. Tommy was 15 and Rob Lowe had his 18th birthday on the set. Matt Dillon had just turned 18. Tom Cruise and Emilio Estevez were just 19. Ralph Macchio was the oldest at 20. They were typical, goofy teenagers, but you got them in front of that camera and they turned into these serious artists. I loved watching that. What's it been like to watch their careers? Insane. And I've stayed in touch with all of them. We bonded really strongly because they're these little boys and they were tearing loose in Tulsa with no adult supervision. So I decided I was their mother and took over mothering them. I loved them very much, and they knew that I loved them very much, and they've never forgotten it. Rob used to call me mom half the time. Who are you closest to now? Well, I'm still really close to almost all of them. Matt and I try to get together whenever we're in the same town. Last time I saw him was in Vancouver. I visit Vancouver twice a year to visit the Supernatural site, so I was there for that. And Tim Hunter was directing a Wayward's Pine episode that Matt was in. So I went up a little early and we had this little reunion on the set. Matt said, "Oh, you need a bottle of water or something, Suze?" And I said, "No, I've got one already. Thanks, honey." And then I looked at him and I said, "I'm sorry, you're over 50. I should quit calling you that." And he said, "I want you to call me honey until the day I die." That's right. I forgot you were a big Supernatural fan. I wrote Eric Kripken a fan letter in the third season and told him what I had liked about it. And 2 days later, I had a letter from him, and he says, "Here at the studio, we've been trying to figure out if this letter is a hoax, but it'd be hard to hoax your email address." It turns out he's one of those I changed his life fans. So he got me a set visit, which I immediately jumped on. I had a really good time, and I got an invitation to come back. And that's evolved into I go usually twice a year and stay for a shooting week. Have you ever done a cameo? Oh, yeah. I got killed in the diner by the evil Leviathan, Sam and Dean. I'm sitting there in the diner, and they decide to kill everyone. When the Leviathan, Sam, and Dean were wiping everyone out, Jared jumps up on a table and cocks a gun at me and starts yelling. He just thought it was hysterical that he just scared me. I was watching the 2005 recut of the Outsiders movie last night, and I didn't realize that you had been the nurse. Yeah, I was the nurse there, and I was a typing teacher in techs. Talk about an obsolete profession nowadays. And I was a hooker in Rumblefish, but I always played a professional. Something you said last time I interviewed you has stuck with me. You said, I could never be that unself conscious again. What exactly did you mean by that? I mean, like when I was 16, that was the year I was doing my major work on The Outsiders. I wasn't thinking about any kind of audience for it. I wasn't thinking about a whole lot of stuff that, of course, afterwards you kind of have to think about. As an adult writer, I think I would say, gosh, it's emotionally over the top. It's so dramatic. But that's the way you feel when you're that age. It's that one reason why it stayed so long. People are like, yes, I felt like this. I could never do that again. It's one of the reasons I'll never write a sequel.